I think you should sit with me while we do this together.
Not a cameraman, you know that.
Okay, I guess maybe the first question I wanted to ask you was if you could recount some of what sort of led up to having the reclamation take place in the first place.
Okay.
I mean, I guess we could do two things. We could ask about the sort of more general history and to talk about stuff that's happened in the past 20 years or so, or some of the history or background, and then talk about what specifically happened in the reclamation. Or we could start with the reclamation and then go back and then forward.
I can give you a recount of what I understand, because I think that there was a lot of things happening before the reclamation. There was, before Janie and Don got involved, even there were young people in the Gowaneo High School, for example, that were questioning their teachers and asking about how did that land get out of our hands, and so there was a lot of our people beginning to realize how close that encroachment was, and so there was questioning, and even when Mayor Heritage was doing their original archaeology report, like in 2003, 2004, some of the people that are currently involved in this reclamation were on the site trying to get information. Were actually kicked off of that site at that time. One of the bench warmers of the Seneca Nation was one of them that was trying to find out information. So I think that our people generally have always been protective and maybe not as active as far as protecting our land and our rights, but they've always been consistent with our messaging, consistent with our concerns, consistent with challenging the Crown and its overtaking of our land and our land base. So anyway, prior to the reclamation itself, the concerns started coming through the youth and stuff like that, and from there, I think is when Janie and Don got involved, and they started holding meetings, and it was mostly just women's meetings, and they were gathering up young women and speaking with a lot of the elders and that in the nations, and asking questions about that. And so then they went to the elected council, for support of doing an information campaign, and they went to Confederacy Council as well, and I believe that it was the Confederacy Council, the elected council didn't support it, but the Confederacy Council did support this awareness campaign, and that's how it all got started. And it got started, I think, in October of 2005, and then again in December, and then from there it went from information and handing out pamphlets and stuff like that into the reclamation itself, when they did stop the development. And that's like the short history of that site. And on February 28th in 2006 is when the actual reclamation took place. And even then, I don't think people realized the impact that it was going to have, not only on this community, but throughout other Haudenosaunee territories and throughout other Indigenous or Ongwehoi territories, and how much of an effect that little action had on uniting our people, strengthening our people, giving them encouraging and strengthening that spirit within to allow them to stand up against the oppression, to stand up against the injustices, and to begin to try and right some of the wrongs of the past.
What are some of the examples of how things changed in the community? Within
Six Nations Haudenosaunee territory specifically, it was a resurgence of our traditional government. That was first and foremost. I think that one of the things, and Janie herself said it, is one of the things that they wanted to see was the Confederacy Council in the lead. And they are. They were supported by the elected council, which hasn't happened in 80-something years. There's always been, we've seen where when the traditional people try to stand up and assert their authority, where the police or RCMP or whoever are brought in to kind of beat that out of them and to instill that fear, so that it causes them to step back again. And so this time it was different, because we had the unity of the people in spite of religious and political beliefs, the people all came together as one voice, and the way that it's supposed to be, and that is one of the biggest and most important things I think that has happened, and you see that although it's been not an easy process, and it still isn't. We're still going through changes. We're going through growing pains, is I think how I referred to it recently, and not in a negative sense, but in a good sense, where change is never said to be easy, but it's an everyday occurrence in our lives, and for the Haudenosaunee here in Grand River, that change has been, to me anyway, one of the most positive things, because you see the clans interact, and you see people taking responsibility. You see men and women perhaps not fully understanding. Some of them do understand their obligations to that guy in Lagoa, but most of them are at least trying, are making the attempts to understand. And so there's this big growth, and there's this big learning experience going on, all the while that we're moving into these, like throughout this negotiation process. And I think, to me anyway, that's the biggest and the most important factor that I've seen.
If you, do you need to?
I was just going to tell you that Scott was walking, so I gave her a ride home.
I wondered, yeah. Okay.
If you have any things you want to jump in with, feel free. So the time comes. And what would you say the impacts were in terms of the other Haudenosaunee communities?
Well, we seen, first of all, when the April 20th raid happened, you seen those people come. You seen, and it wasn't just Haudenosaunee territories, you seen other Ongwahome nations and that support from all parts of Canada and the United States. And so that was a big unification of the Ongwahome nations, and it wasn't just in North America, it was throughout the world, where because of the internet, because of today's technology and that messaging that we're able to get out there about our responsibilities and our relationship, not only with creation, but our responsibilities to that peace, that we're the holders of that peace. And you always hear politicians and that talk about peace, but their actions are sort of in an opposite. Their peacekeepers are over in other parts of the world killing people in the name of peace. And we stood on April 20th at Ganastado without weapons. We stood with the truth. We stood with our law. And we upheld that peace in a very powerful and significant way, where it was a spiritual, and it was a connection where when you're standing with the Creator, when you're standing with the law, then that's where that power comes from, that's where that strength comes from. And when they talk about power in our great law, that's the kind of power it is. It's not a physical power, it's a spiritual power. And anyway, that's the kind of thing that it did for other Ongwahome territories and Haudenosaunee territories. It's sort of like, it was a spiritual awakening, I think. And it's been happening. There's been other events in our communities where it's happened in the past. We've had Oka, and we've had Ipperwash, and we've had Gustafson Lake, and we've had different things happen. But this one seemed to be one that sparked a bigger and a stronger alliance. And I believe it all has to do with timing. I believe it has to do with, like I said, 10 years ago even, we wouldn't have had those connections like we do today through the internet and through organizations and helpers. It wasn't just the red man that worked on this. It was people that believed in that peace, people that believed in the responsibilities to the environment and protecting for the future generations. So it wasn't just a Haudenosaunee responsibility, it was a worldwide responsibility, and people came into that and accepted that and worked with that.
And what are some of the examples of the kind of international support that you received?
Well, we had Nelson Mandela's secretary come to the front line. We've had the president of Bolivia send representatives and speak with some of our chiefs, and I was there, and different ones were there. We've had letters of support and worldwide action taken on different times, and just small things, but a lot of awareness campaigning going on, and so those are the kind of things that we had I don't know how many thousands of emails from different parts of the world, and just calling out for Canada on right of the Crown to honor the treaties, to uphold their responsibilities, and so those are the kind of things that this has impacted on, and I think that it's all, like I said, it's all positive, it's all good, and it was all done in a peaceful and responsible way.
What were your reactions when you see some of the footage of the people in Caledonia protesting and their sort of racist signs or their chants, or how do you feel about that?
Well, when I get past the anger, because I think anger is one of the easiest emotions that any of us show, it saddens me. It discourages a person to know how much misinformation and miseducation is out there about who we are as a people. And it's true that Caledonia has a history. It's true that all of the towns and townships that have been built along the Grand River, they have a history, but their history is only like 100 years old or whatever. But they forget that there was a history that existed before, and there was a history that existed prior to even the Haldeman Proclamation itself. And so when I look at it, I think about how we failed in some senses of making sure that that history has been told, and now we're in the forefront, now that we're making those attempts. When you're met with such blatant racism, when you're met with that defiance and anger and the abuse of the law that they talk about, and you know, that two-tier justice and everything that they speak of, those are the things that frustrate me. Those are the things that I guess challenge me to try and make it better, challenge me to try and get our message out there. And I think that our people, there's a lot of things we could have done different, and probably a lot of things that we could have done better, but we're at least trying, we're at least making the attempts to educate. We're trying to, if not educate this current generation, at least somehow, and for the future generations, make it different, make it so that they understand, give them the information that's been lacking and the history that's been lacking, and try and promote that peace and that unity into the future.
And how do you respond to people saying that there's a two-tier justice and that the OPP aren't enforcing Canadian laws appropriately?
Well, I think the first part of it is there is a two-tier justice, and we've been, I don't know whether victims of it is the right word, but we've been the recipients of that two-tier justice for many, many generations. If you look within the Canadian court system and the Canadian jails and you look at the Native people that are incarcerated and you look at the disregard of a pre-existing law that's thousands of years old, to me that is a two-tier justice. When one nation or a supposed nation assumes that authority over another nation. And when it comes to I forgot the question that you asked me, Tom.
Oh, just the response to two-tier justice. I mean, to me, what it sort of brings up is the different kind of legal codes that Haudenosaunee already has a sort of sense of like a kind of legal system and a justice system.
And I guess the biggest part is that it truly magnifies and shows the effects of colonialism on our people. The Haudenosaunee never ever acceded jurisdiction to the Crown. They've never ever been a conquered nation of people. And that subtly and quietly they've maintained their responsibilities and their law to the best of their ability while the rest of the world was pushing the colonialism on them. And it was like it sort of went underground. I guess people have referred to it as sort of gone underground for over 80 years because of the enforcement of the Indian Act and the elected council and the system. But it was never ever not in existence. It was never put aside. And I think that now, because we are standing up for who we are standing up for our law, the struggle then becomes how do we as a nation take that responsibility so that when things do happen, whether it's an incident between one of our people and one of theirs, and like meaning within Canada, I guess, then what is our responsibility to make sure that we've made, like, upheld that peace, protected not only the interests of our people and our law and our rights, but also really look at if a purported crime or if a harm has been done to another person, then how do we take responsibility to ensure that that wrong has been righted? And I think that we're making those attempts, and I think that shows the difference between our law and what Canada has as its laws, is because now they don't consider our law, they don't consider our people, they don't consider who we are and the inherent rights that come with us. They want to trample over us, they want to force us into compliance, and they use that law as a tool. And when we stand up for our law, when we stand up for our rights, is when they start to holler about that two-tier justice and one law for all and stuff, and yet they fail to recognize that their own government is guilty of crimes against the Haudenosaunee, and crimes of not following their own law. You know, we've talked about this land issue and HDI and everything that's happening and that has grown and occurred since the reclamation, and the growth and the strength of our Confederacy, and it's legislating its own policies and its own laws and things like that. But in a sense, it's brought to the forefront on how Canada doesn't comply with its own laws. And you know, we had a discussion this morning, Dick and I, about what does that mean, you know, when their Supreme Court makes a decision, you know, and when does it come into effect to be a law, and where in that process do we as Haudenosaunee get to see Canada uphold its own laws when it comes to our land and our land rights. And so those are some of the things that are at the forefront now. Those are some of the things that the HDI and the people of Six Nations are trying to enlighten and to bring forth into the world's eyes, I guess. And that's where the struggle is. That's where, like, we're moving into the future. The negotiations right now is dealing with past injustices. The Haudenosaunee, and through that Development Institute, is trying to look to the future and trying to make sure that we've protected our people, in that when there is development that occur on our lands, that we do have a say. You know, we do have a responsibility. It's not just a right, it's a responsibility and an obligation, like I said, to the future, to our Mother Earth, to the waters, to the airs, to all the people, all humans and all mankind. And it's the life sustenance of who we are and all of creation, and your responsibility not just to humans but to everything, and that includes our medicine plants, it includes the animals, and it includes all of that which encompasses, I guess, creation. And that is what the Development Institute is trying to protect. That's what I believe. That's what I believe my responsibility in being involved in it comes from, and that's what keeps me there, I guess. And it's not something that's been easy. It's not something that's been even fully accepted, because our own people haven't had the opportunity of understanding it. You know, we've not been able to get through our systems and those processes that were put in place thousands of years ago by the peacemaker, through the clans and through the nations, because of the effects of colonialism, because of the effects of the dysfunction in our society. And so we're working through those things. That's one of the good things, and that's what I mean about growing pains, is it just because it's not easy, and just because it hurts, and just because every day there's a new challenge, and every day even your own people are attacking you and questioning you and condemning you, it doesn't mean that the end result isn't going to be something good. And if we just stop, if we just don't try, then we've really neglected our responsibilities to the future, and we've kind of said to the Creator then that we don't believe you. And I won't go there. I refuse to allow the negative. I refuse to allow fear. I refuse to allow the anger of what's happening today and that Caledonia rally against HDI and all this stuff. I refuse to allow it to shake me, because when you're the mountain, okay, and when I talk about being the mountain, that means that I believe that I'm standing with the Creator and I'm standing with the Creator's law. And nothing can shake that, because to me that's where everything comes from. I don't draw my strength from other human beings. I don't draw my strength from man-made laws or anything like that. I draw my strength from the Creator. And so when I stand up in defense of that law and our responsibilities, that's who I'm standing with. And that's what I try to put out there, and that's what I mean about being that mountain, because you don't shake, you don't falter, I guess. You just keep going, and it's what drives me, and that's how I stand strong.
What kind of goals are you trying to accomplish with the? I mean, I know you spoke in general terms, but say in 5 or 10 years, what do you hope to have accomplished with the HDI?
Specifically is to secure a land base for our people, our own places to grow. I know that in the Ontario's places to grow, they've secured areas around the Niagara and the Greater Toronto area where they don't allow development any longer, and they've called it their green space. They've protected that. But what they did when they put that legislation through is their places to grow was all along the Haldeman track. So they came, boom, right into our territory. And so what the HDI is going to do is to protect our interests, to protect the Haudenosaunee interests in that, and to make sure that we do have a say in anything. And so the first part of it was to create our own places to grow. And so there was a map that was put to the community back in the summer, I think, of last year, where it showed a red zone, for example, and that red zone kind of goes along from the current territory to the lake. And it's not something that's like, this is it, this is our official plan or final plan. It's like, this is the beginning of an understanding of our people, is that if we were to secure a land base for our future generations, because right now we're down to 5% of the original Haldeman tract, 20,000 acres and 20,000 people. It doesn't leave much for future. And so the red zone was created so that if we do have, plans for our people and places for them to ensure that our children have a land base for not only growing their gardens, but building their homes and stuff. So that was one part of it. The other part of it is to ensure that the Crown has honored those original lease agreements that Joseph Brant set in place. The Confederacy Council sanctioned him to set up what was originally the 4 blocks, and they were life leases basically. And in those leases, it was designed so that yes, development would go, but the development and the lease monies were to ensure that our people had an ongoing income, and it was done to me in a very I don't know what the word is. It's just like, but in the 1800s and like 1830s, when you think about the chiefs' councils at that time and the people and the thinking and how those lease arrangements were set up, it was really quite futuristic in thinking, where they made sure that our people were looked after. And even the Crown in their own documentation last week when we were doing a caucus, and Jock was reading from some of the letters from the Indian agent at the time, and one of them basically said, if we were to do what the Six Nations have secured in these leases, they would be the richest people on this earth. And so that was where they looked at it, and it was all about the money. And so that, the day that those leases were made was the day that they began to try and break them, was the day that they began to undermine them, and the day that they began to ignore them. And so it shows you the honor of the Crown, even back then, even when they were making treaties or signing leases, or they took the honor of our people and our willingness to accept their word, and they violated that, and they've been constantly violating it. And so what I see the HDI doing is not allowing those violations to continue. to making sure that those perpetual care and maintenance lease agreements that were set up in the 1800s are honored, so that when we do look at development in those areas, that's the intention, and that's what we are going to ensure is upheld.
I guess there might be two sort of concerns with the HDI just off the top of my head that I've heard. One is that Six Nations should not sell any land or allow any development to happen whatsoever from an outside colonizing power at all on the tract. So making any kind of an agreement is sort of complicity with colonizers to take the land and to pollute it and to destroy it.
Well, I think if you look at that green plan and what we just talked about in those leases, those first 4 blocks, that was the intent of our ancestors, to allow that development to continue. What I'm saying is that what we need to do today, because of industrial pollution and everything, what we need to do today is look at the development and look at all the aspects of who we are, what that loss is about, our responsibilities, and to make sure if we're going to allow a development to continue, that it's consistent with that, which means respecting the earth and the waters and the airs. And our ancestors never said no development, and I know today that that's the feeling of a lot of our people. But when you look in how we broke down that green plan, I guess, in the red zone and the yellow zone and the green zone, part of that green zone, or that yellow zone, I guess, was those first 4 blocks. And if you look in those areas, Brantford, Kitchener, Waterloo areas, they're already it's already developed. A lot of what's happening is cleaning up of old development areas and redeveloping. And I think the first part would be to protect the farmlands. Like, to me, that's important. That's what the earth does, is it allows us to grow our foods and stuff. But if there's an area that's already been developed, that's polluted and it should be cleaned up, then those are the areas that we might consider that a development could occur. And I think that all we're trying to do is look at, like I said, look at what was given to us by our ancestors in those lease agreements, and to do our best in today's society to move forward into the future, at the same time protecting what little green space we have left. And I think that is a respectful and a realistic way of dealing with things, because I think to say no development, realistically, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot, because what if we wanted to develop something? Then would we become the hypocrites? Like, there's a lot of things that we have to look at, including landfills that the HDI has been currently looking at. Is like, we have to be responsible too. We have to look at what is it that we're doing and how do we improve what we're doing, and make sure that when we talk about other people and look at stopping other development, we have to make sure we're looking at our own backyard to ensure that we aren't being hypocrites, and that we are. You can work together. You can look at and using and working in consistently with that two-row with Canada and through like their ministries of environment and things like that to secure and protect those things on a national, like nation to nation level. And I think that's being responsible.
What kind of strategies or mechanisms does HDI have in place or is thinking to develop to avoid the sort of problem that in this kind of relationship between developers and HDI, there's a huge amount of money that's at stake, and that there could be potentially, people could be influenced by that amount of money, or there could be, personal corruption that might develop, or like that seems to be a potential that needs to be responded to.
And I think that the first and foremost, and the thing that we're working and continue to work on right from when it started is the implementation of this board. And that board would consist of community members that are given that responsibility to oversee this Development Institute. And we're looking to our people for those that have expertise in different areas. Like right now we're creating policies, like an energy policy, an archaeology, like laws that we know in today's society, you sort of have to write those things down. You have to have something that says, well, what does that mean? You know, when you look at our Garlagoa and what it says, how do we then make sure that anything that we're doing or any development that we consider is complying with certain basic law that we have? And so the energy policy, the environmental policy, and archaeology policy, I mean, energy specifically because you're looking at how many different windmill companies that have come, wind power that have come, and solar power and different things like that. And so things like that is one of the areas that we're looking at, so that it's structured, it's it puts some meat, I guess, on what we're doing. As far as the people themselves, and this is where the Confederacy and the people, this community, the Haudenosaunee, have to come together and come to a way to look at how is this board going to secure that there won't be any underhandedness or corruption or whatever. And that, to me, again goes back to who we are as a people, our responsibilities with the clans and the nation and the Confederacy. So the system has to be consistent with historically who we are and how it works. And that's my ideal anyway. And so you bring all of those worlds together into one, and that board would then be that. And even as far as the monies themselves, there would have to be some sort of a trust that or something that's developed that protects that, so that any decisions that are made with respect to how is that money, like that perpetual care and maintenance, what does that mean? What are the needs of our community? You know, we talk about our elders, we talk about the roads, we talk about the water, we talk about sewage, we talk about landfills, we talk about health, things that historically and even in the last 10 years we've seen cutbacks through the Indian Act system, where a lot of the medications that some of our elders need, heart patients and things, that they're having to pay out of their own pockets, because every year Canada somehow finds a way to cut back and to justify not upholding what those perpetual care and maintenance lease agreements were about. And so what we're doing then is saying, you know what, Indian Act, you're over there. You go ahead and you deal with the band council and do what you're going to do and continue on that part of things, because that's part of the past. What we're doing is moving into the future, and we're securing our own lease agreements with those developers or municipalities or anyone else, because that is our right as a confederacy, as a nation of people, as a government. That is our right, and again, it's our obligation. And so that's the area that we're moving into, and that's what we're securing. And we will make sure that whatever institutions, whatever boards, whatever structure that our government puts in place is far better than the one that has been there in existence now. You know, we've heard premiers in Ontario and that saying, well, we want consensus, we want to see consensus in any ratification process that the Six Nations put forward. And yet in I don't know whether it was, what year it was, when they pushed through one of their land claims with the band council, they had 200 people vote in that process, and they accepted that. And here today they're telling us they want to see consensus. Like anything that we put together through our processes is going to be a lot more secure and a lot better representation, I think, of our people. And consensus, to my understanding anyways, you don't always get 100% consensus from all the people. But why those clans are important and why those nations are important is that the people, through their clan mothers and through that chief, their voice goes to that council. And when those chiefs sit together in council, that's where that consensus comes in, because all the process, the way it was set up, the people are supposed to have the say first. And that's what we're doing right now, is getting that information to them. You know, and it's not done in our common ways, is like through the clans and stuff. We're taking it more on a modern version, where we're going nations and we're going districts, because we still have that Indian Act system here and people that believe in it. So we're respecting all areas, I guess, that we can. And so, but when we move forward to any kind of ratification process, we will ensure that we've gotten to the people and we've heard their voice more than just, you know, one or two community meetings and then a decision is made, or the decision is made before the community meetings. Like historically, we've seen all that. We've seen where the Indian Act system and the government of Canada has used what they call community meetings as ratification. We know that doesn't work. I fought against that for 20-something years, against that process. So why would I now accept that as some sort of ratification? We're moving to something beyond that, and we are building and restructuring and lifting up those clans and those nations and trying to encourage them to uphold their responsibilities there.
Do you think that it's going to require further sort of land occupations or reclamations or blockades in order to get this, the changes that you want to come through, or do you think that that the ball's on its way rolling and just out of the negotiations that are currently going ahead?
I don't really know what's going to happen there, because I know that with the development itself, when you look in Brantford, for example, and you look at the speed of development that has gone on since the reclamation, Ontario has made it very clear that they don't respect that process that we're sitting in. And actually Canada as well. The Crown has made it very clear that they're not honourable. They're sitting there and they're buying time. And while they're buying time, they're pushing development. They're pushing it through at a rate that has been more increased in the last 2 years than it ever would have been. And they're allowing development to continue even without their processes being fulfilled, meaning that development goes on and they haven't even issued a development permit. So we can see what their strategy is. Their strategy is to push everything through as quickly as they can and get development going, because they say that third parties will not be, expropriated or whatever. They say that they will not remove third parties from the land. What I see is our people having been very tolerant, very respectful, and to a point of such frustration that I would be surprised if through this summer, if we don't see some progress and some honor and some indication that the Crown is serious about dealing with our people on that national level. I would be very surprised if we don't see another reclamation, because as long as Ontario sits there and says we stand beside our land registry system, and as long as Canada sits there and says we don't have any lands to give back to you, ultimately what they're saying is that we're going to continue playing this game. You know, Ontario has the lands. That's what Canada says. Ontario holds the lands. And when you go over to Ontario, Ontario says, well, you got to deal with Canada because they're the ones that are responsible for Indians. And so they've been ping-ponging us back and forth for a few hundred years. And we've said to them, the Crown is indivisible. You are one Crown. And we don't care how you do things on your side of the wampum. This is how we do things on ours, and we're not going to tolerate that anymore. We're not going to take this flippant attitude towards what to us is law. You know, those treaties are law. Those treaties that we have with the Crown are pre-Confederation treaties. They were in existence long before Canada, long before, like even thousands of years old is where our law dates back to. And so when those Europeans and that first started coming over to what we call Turtle Island, we recognized that we had to have a relationship with them, and we knew that we weren't going to get rid of them. So we created that two-row wampum silver covenant chain as a means of a relationship with them. And we've always upheld that. We've always honored that and respected that. And today, because of the creation of Canada, we're still honoring it. We're still trying to respect it. But they're not, and until we see some movement, you know, our people said 2 years ago, let's repolish that silver covenant chain, not just in this process, because I look at this process as part of that repolishing, but in the ceremonial and the symbolic part of it. To do that would mean a lot, and would show a lot on Canada's behalf of the Crown, that they do respect it. And right now that's not being shown. The Governor General of Canada, they've sort of played with that role, where we understand her role is to be the liaison with the Crown, and they've kind of pushed her aside, and they've got us dealing with these ministers of Indian Affairs and all these things, and so they've kind of pushed down the ladder responsibilities on how to deal with us, and we're pushing it back up.
Yeah, there's a spiritual element to this other than political?
Absolutely. I think everything that we're doing is, again, it's based on the spirituality, and I think when I talked about timing, one of the things that I don't talk about often, but it means a lot to me, when excuse me, when I first became involved at the reclamation, because I wasn't there at the beginning, my mom had been hospitalized, so I was home looking after her. Dick was very much involved, and so he kept me posted and stuff. But when I finally got there and got involved, it was in probably March. We set out we put out a call to unite the nations, the Ongwehoi nations of the world, and we didn't just do it through I guess to me it was done on a spiritual sense first. We went to the fire. You know, we took our tobacco and our prayers and we went to the Creator and said, listen, you know, as women, we understand that we have a role and a connection with the earth that's likened to a mother that's tied to her baby through that umbilical cord. And we took that understanding and we put those words into the fire and we called out for the uniting of the Ongwehoi nations of the world, meaning we wanted to instill that peace and uphold that peace in the four directions. That is where things changed for me. That's where I seen that all of a sudden we were getting emails and the support was growing, and I was getting calls from different parts of the world and emails from different parts of the world. To me, this is about a spiritual movement and a spiritual responsibility of who we are as Ongwehoi and our responsibilities, like I said, to the earth and our environment, but more so that peace. To me, this is about world peace. And we all talk about that, but do we really understand it? And do we understand the implications of how every single one of us in this little reclamation that we started here has had such an effect on that globalization of peace? And that's something I'm really proud of. And that's what I mean when I say that this is so much bigger than a land rights issue. To me, that's what this is about. This is about the big battle of light and dark, good versus evil. This is about our responsibilities to the Creator and what He gave to us and how we were supposed to protect it. And maybe we did fall down on the job, you know, at some points in our life, or maybe because of the colonialism and the oppression, it seemed to have subsided into this little lull, but it didn't die. And those spirits and those ancestors and the grandfathers that we connect with and is to me so very much alive in all of us that are working here today. And that's what this battle is. It is a spiritual battle.
Any other questions or any other?
Do you think how do you feel that this battle will affect the upcoming generations on a positive note? How do you think it'll change the reserve?
I'm hoping that what we're doing here today, because we have to understand that this is just the beginning. You know, we're beginning to make changes in how Canada deals with the Haudenosaunee, how the rest of the world views and looks at the Haudenosaunee, and we're setting the stage for our future to go forth not only with the pride and of who they are and the history that they have, but also we're making sure, at least the intent in part of it through that HDI, but I'm sure there'll be other things too, is the intent to make sure that they've got the tools, they've got the foundation, just like our ancestors did for us. Those first 4 blocks of perpetual care and maintenance are the tools that we're using today. We've added HDI to those tools now. So now they've got the lease agreements, they've got HDI, so they've got a mechanism to deal with developers, to deal with municipalities and towns and townships. That's what we're building, and that's where our children and our grandchildren, our future, will have to build on and to move with. And so we're structuring our government, I guess, in ways that it hasn't been done for a long time, and bringing it into this century, bringing it forward, not compromising it by any means, but lifting it up and strengthening it and using what we have in today's society as tools to make sure that we've protected and secured a future for our people. And that's where this is going to go. And by any means, it's not going to be over with this generation. Our children, our grandchildren, and those generations to come are going to be dealing with this. I just hope that we've done our part to make it a better place, and made sure that that we haven't left them with I guess to make sure that we have left them with something that is clear and concise, just like our treaties were and are, because it's not like they die. And I think that's one of the things that Canadian people don't understand is like those treaties, you know, they talk about, well, that's pre-Confederation, and why are we looking at that, and why are we talking about that? Well, hello, so is your Constitution Act, so is your British North America Act, so is everything that Canada has built itself on in its history. And so why is it okay for you to rely on yours but not for us to rely on ours? And I think that that's the biggest thing that we have to do now, is to make sure our children are educated to know who they are and understand that we are a nation of people, and that if anyone is questioning the nation, it's Canada that should be questioning its own nationhood. And I had an elder that I dearly love, Sylvia Sandy. She was forever always honoring and upholding that proclamation of 1784, that Haldimand Proclamation. And she always talked about what is it to be a nation, you know, and in her view, a nation, you had to have a land base, you had to have a language, you had to have a constitution, and she said you always had to have a standing army. Well, when you look at Canada, what does it have? It doesn't have a language, it has a borrowed language. It doesn't have a land base because they've taken and they've stolen the lands. It doesn't have a constitution, it has a Constitution Act, which means it's acting as a nation. But the Haudenosaunee, we have several languages, and I know through assimilation and genocidal tactics they tried to destroy that, but our languages are flourishing, our languages are growing. You know, we have elders and others that have taken up that language and are teaching it, you know, through not only the immersion schools and that, but just in resource centers and other areas where that language is being realized now, that it's not something that's nice. It's not you know, that's how cute that we have the language. No, that's part of who we are. In our languages is everything that the Creator gave and intended, and that's what distinguishes you as a nation. And we do have a land base. You know, we have that responsibility over the whole Turtle Island, like I spoke about. That's not just something that's in our heads. The Creator said in one of the stories that the Ongwehoe, you're that eagle on top of the tree, and you have that responsibility to cry out to the other nations when there's danger and when there's any kind of harm that's coming. And we've been crying out for generations, it's just that nobody's listening. Now, because of the spiritual connection, because of the awakening of our people and other peoples throughout the world, when we cried out, people heard. And we all stood up and we all took responsibility. And it took more than just those two women to do this reclamation. And I think that's something that people need to understand too. It might have took, you know, those young students to first bring the awareness, for Janie and Don to bring it to the forefront. But it took a whole nation of people to keep it going, and it still is. And it's more than just the Haudenosaunee nations. It took all of our supporters. It took all of the people that through other territories and other parts of the world to make sure that that message was heard, to make sure that that in some ways that Canada couldn't just use force like it tried to do on April 20th, the police. They couldn't bring in the army, because the awareness and everything that every single person that did their little part in, that's what it took to keep this going, and that's what it's going to take to keep it in ongoing. It's not just the Haudenosaunee. This is about all of our responsibilities, regardless of whatever color your skin is. As a human being, as part of this great, vast creation, it's all of our responsibility to protect it. And that's what, to me, this reclamation has come into, and that's what we're moving forward with.
Sounds like a good spot to end.
Heck yeah, it was